Hello everyone and welcome to today's Hackerearth webinar. And today I have with me someone who has actually mastered the art of campus recruiting. And today we have with us Colleen Grant, who is the Global Campus Recruiting Manager at HubSpot. And there I am, your host. I'm Arbaz, and I'll be monitoring the questions that come in today as well as be a part of this session. To start off, I'd like to tell each one of you that this session is being recorded, and we'll be sharing the recording with each one of you after this session. In case you miss out on something, don't worry about that. We'll send across the recording for your reference, and maybe you can share it with your friends who might not be able to make it to the session today. A little bit about the platform first. This is the GoToWebinar platform. In the panel, there is a questions tab in which you can ask questions whenever you have them. And we'll address the questions at the end altogether, since there might be some questions that might be overlapping with someone else who's asked something. So if you are able to see the questions tab, then maybe someone can write yes so that we have an affirmative to move ahead. Okay, yes, so I see a couple of yeses coming through. So that's it from my end as of now. And now we'll have our special guest for today, Colleen, who will take over the presentation and run you through how you can master the art of campus recruiting. Over to you, Colleen, and hope everyone has a great session today.
Awesome, thank you so much. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, great. So I am Colleen from HubSpot in Cambridge, Massachusetts, and I'm here to talk to you today a little bit about mastering the art of campus recruiting. So I want to start off just with a quick agenda before we dive on in. So I'm going to get started today by just telling you a little bit about who I am and why I'm here talking to you about campus recruiting. I'm then going to dive into what I think is a pretty decent go-to-campus approach and what's worked for us here at HubSpot. I'm then going to move on to talking about your actual interview process and how to tailor that to be best working for student talent. And then I'm going to talk about, most importantly, retaining that student talent, because what's the point in going to campus, doing all this work, and not actually keeping the students on long term? And then at the end, of course, we'll save some time for questions. Great. So here's a somewhat overwhelming slide to look at my journey into campus recruiting. So I started at HubSpot in Q3 2015, and when I got started here, I was an associate tech recruiter. My main goals for my job was to actually hire not campus, was to hire more full-time engineers, software engineers into HubSpot, because that's what I was doing before I joined here. But I joined in Q3. I joined in September. So as I'm sure a lot of you know on this call, September is the kickoff of campus season. So it's really when everything starts ramping up and you're hiring all that great student talent. So my first task when I joined here was to hire our co-op class for software engineering. Now, the way HubSpot was set up at the time, we didn't have a specialized campus team at all. What we had was recruiters that just worked for individual departments, and they were in charge of hiring all the students into the departments that they supported, and then kind of getting back to full-time hiring. So that was my plan. That's what I was going to do. The idea was to really get through the campus hires as fast as possible so that you can get back to your full-time hiring. So that's what we did, and in Q4 2015, shortly after, we looked over the class that we had just hired for co-op, and I was definitely disappointed with what I saw. The students were amazing, the talent was great, but there was quite literally no diversity in our class. We had like 2 different schools, and there was a lot of white male students. So I was disappointed that this happened, and I think it was my first time really seeing firsthand that diversity was such an issue in tech, and it stuck with me. I knew I wanted to change it. So if you fast forward into 2016, it was time to hire our next co-op class, and same thing again. I dedicated my time to hiring that co-op class while we needed it before I went back to full-time hiring. But this time I really focused in a lot more on what I was doing and tried to be more thoughtful about diversifying that talent pool as best as I could. And in Q2 2016, I sat down with my manager and discussed a lot about passionate I was about the campus space. At that point, I was, traveling to a couple schools, not really doing anything crazy, just trying to get through that co-op class. But I was really, really just enjoying the time talking to students. They bring a lot of passion, as I'm sure a lot of you know. So it's just a contagious environment to be a part of. So at that point, she had approached me and said, we do have a need at the company now to have somebody 100% dedicated to campus recruiting, and asked if I wanted to do it. And of course, it was at that point really where my passion was bringing me. So I said yes, and she said, great. Well, you can't just do engineering, you have to do all of campus. So that's when I started seeing campus as a real full big picture for an organization and not just engineering. But it was my first time hiring for anything other than an engineer. So it was definitely a slightly overwhelming task, but a good one. So I went through planning season over the summer, which I'm sure everyone does. And then in Q3 2016, it was time to hit the ground running again. I did a ton of traveling all across the US and across Europe to talk to as many students as possible. At that point, I really just wanted to get our name out there and our brand out there as a great place to work for students. So I did that, really was traveling a ton, burnt myself out probably just a little bit. But in Q4 2016, I looked back at our application volume, focused in on our metrics for the year. And what we found was that the application volume that year increased by over 400% from the year before. So that really goes to show that when you have somebody dedicated to working the campus funnel, figuring out where these students are, your application volume is hopefully going to increase and representative of that. And so then at that point, things are going well, but this volume is pretty crazy, especially for one person recruiting out of it. So in Q2 2017 is when we got approval from the business to start actually hiring a team. And that's exactly what we did. We hired a larger team to really support the different areas of the business as it pertains to campus, to make sure that we were being thoughtful and deliberate on our approach, and it wasn't just kind of me running around like a chicken with my head cut off. And then in Q3 2017, a manager position opened on the team, and I applied and interviewed and got that position to become the team manager for campus recruiting, and I've been in that seat ever since. Q4 2017 was another big shift for us. Diversity, inclusion, belonging was always something that I was really, really dedicated to as just an individual, but also as a recruiter. That first co-op class that I hired was disappointing to me, so I knew that I wanted my role to be dedicated to making sure that didn't happen again. And in Q4 2017, we really took this stance as a campus team to make sure that every single thing that we're doing as it pertains to our campus talent was answering for the company's diversity, inclusion, and belonging goals. Because ultimately we feel that, if we're able to bring in great student talents that's representative of those goals, it's going to push HubSpot to be a better place overall. So every event that we do, all the schools that we go to is really focused on that. And we'll talk a little bit more later about how we do that. The following year, we made another big bet. In Q3 2018 was the first time that we purchased and became a premium partner for Handshake. I'm sure anybody on the call right now who is active in campus recruiting is familiar with Handshake. A lot of schools are using it now, and a lot of companies are too. But becoming a premium partner made us able to have full access to sourcing and really tailoring our approach. Again, I'm going to give a couple examples later on exactly what we do there, but purchasing Handshake was a huge change to make sure that our funnel was looking and acting the way that we wanted it to. And here we are in 2019, and I'll be honest, things really are just continuing to get better and better. Our program's getting better. We're getting more commitment from the business. So we'll talk a little bit about how we think about that and the major changes and bets that we made to get there. But of course, we wouldn't be able to do this without my team. So I'm going to give you a quick glimpse into what our team looks like here. So this is my campus recruiting team at HubSpot. As I'm sure you'll notice, it's a pretty small team. So we don't have a huge campus function here. And I want, as you think about what the suggestions I'm going to give you, I want you to keep in mind that it isn't a huge team that's running this. We're small but mighty. So we have 2 North American tech recruiters. We have 1 European tech recruiter, 2 North American growth recruiters. The way we think about growth recruiting here, it is anything that's non-tech. So if you think about support, services, sales, marketing, things like that. And then we have 1 also in EMEA. We have 1 MBA recruiter, and then we have 1 amazing co-op in the center there, Jill, who really keeps us all in line, make sure that things are running smoothly. So as we move forward, just keep in mind that we're doing all these things, we're making all these changes, and we're doing it with a pretty small team. Okay, great. So let's talk a little bit about the Go to Campus approach. So first things first is picking target schools. It's something that's not super easy to do, but obviously incredibly important. So here are 3 ways that I've always thought about picking target schools, and I encourage my team to think about as well. So first things first, you have to go to the business and figure out what you're hiring for. You really don't want to go to a school if you don't have any positions available. So once you have your headcount plan, you should see where the major priorities are aligning. Is it in sales? Is it engineering? Is it marketing? How's that looking, and how should you plan accordingly? Is it full-time? Is it interns? So once you have your headcount plan, you can see what you're hiring for and what the core requirements are for those positions. Once you have those core requirements, that's when you go into looking at the curriculum matches for schools. So I'm sure there's already some schools that come top of mind, and you can actually use Handshake to find more schools for that. But in my experience, all schools that I've gone after have their curriculum right online. So you can see exactly what you're looking for there and make sure to match the core requirements for the positions that you're looking to hire for. So for example, if you're looking to hire into engineering and you know for sure that you need more front-end engineers, you should go to a school that actually is teaching a course on front-end development. You can go into their curriculum and see that there's going to be a course specialized in JavaScript or in JavaScript frameworks. That's a great way to really figure out what schools are providing the student talent that's going to be the best match for your job before you go out and try to talk to a bunch of students that might not be super qualified. And then the third one I have here is actually one of the first things that we look for, and we look at the diversity metrics of the schools. So we want to make sure that when we're going to a school, as I said before, the school matches the diversity, inclusion, and belonging goals that HubSpot has. I don't want to go to a school that isn't going to support the mission that we have as an organization, because the campus funnel is such a huge part of our hiring program now. So you can, especially in the US, you can find most of these metrics online. I would recommend not going directly to the school's website. Instead, use a third-party provider that's doing the research for these metrics. But typically, you can see, what percentage of minorities are at the school, percentage of gender, how many students are in each major. All of these things are really important to think about. The other thing that's important to think about is not just the diversity metrics of the school, but what sort of programming the school has that promotes inclusion and belonging on the campus. Because the more the students are exposed to that at school and feel included there, they're going to bring that to your organization and make it that much of a better place to work, which of course is the end goal for all of us. But one thing that I really want to focus on that's really important is to not boil the ocean when it comes to picking target schools. I have a pretty small team, and the last thing I want to do is totally burn everybody out. So the way that we think about picking target schools as far as a number is thinking about 3 schools per department per region. So for example, for engineering, we should have 3 new schools in the US and 3 new schools out of our European program. So that way you're not dedicating all this time to a bunch of different schools and seeing what sticks, but instead coming up with a really strategic plan for a few schools that you know are a great match and you're going to be happy with the students that come from there. On top of that, of course, you have all the nurture schools that you might already have a brand at. You probably don't have to visit those schools if you don't want to. Maybe you can just send an alum from your organization to do a talk there. But instead, really focus your energy and your dedication on these target schools instead of going to 50 plus different schools in a season. Okay, so also super important. What are you going to do when you actually get to campus? So I have 4 ways to think about this here. There's the point of engagement. There's using the inbound methodology, because I can't give a talk from HubSpot and not talk about inbound. It's very important to bring backup, and it's also super important to control your own advertising. So let's start with point of engagement. Now, I know that this can probably be a little bit of a hot take, but when it comes to talking to people at campuses, this is the way that we go about it. We'll really try to talk to student groups first. We feel like meeting students where they're at is super important, and they're going to give us the best insight into what students are looking for. Also, professors are a great avenue into campus. If you can get any professors to communicate with you and tell you what their students are looking for, they're going to be great advocates for your positions down the line. What we found when it comes to professors is a lot of students will go to their professors first to get recommendations on what jobs are the best match for them. So that really is super important to have their buy-in and to have them promoting your opportunities whenever you can. I gave career services a maybe. We have a lot of career service departments that are amazing partners to us. They promote our events, they figure out what our best approach is, and they just really help us navigate our way. But career services can also be a barrier to entry at times, especially if you're not willing to pay very much money to get in there. Sometimes they won't even give you the time of day. So I'd say be strategic about going after career service departments and your approach in that way. You could be super excited and end up getting a great partnership, or you could be really disappointed and not really get what you need from them. And then another thing career service will probably try to get you to do is go to the career fair. In general, at HubSpot, we say no to career fairs. There's a couple exceptions there, but it's very, very rare that we'll be seen at a career fair, major career fair for a school. The reason being is we do feel like it's a huge time suck. It can be very draining for our recruiters and for professionals from the company that we're bringing with us. And you usually don't end up getting a very good rapport with the students. We found that majority of time at a career fair, I'm just sitting there rambling on and on and on about what HubSpot does, and I'm not really getting to know the students at all. So that's not a great use of time. So we don't usually go to career fairs. Instead, we focus on tech talks where we're actually providing content to somebody, which brings me to the inbound methodology. So inbound in general is providing content to potential consumers rather than being invasive with traditional forms of marketing and sales. That's what HubSpot does, it's what our product does, and we're bringing that over to our campus model as well. We want to provide valuable content to the students, and I really think that you should too. Ultimately, it's something that's good to keep in mind is that you probably are going to hire about 10% of the attendees at a tech talk that you do, and that's actually a really great ratio to hire. So what really gives for the rest of the people that come and they don't get a job, what's super important is to think about those people and what are they going to do, what are they going to take with them if they don't end up working at your organization. So make sure that you're providing something useful, and also make sure it's relevant to the skills needed for the roles that you're hiring for. So going back to that front-end developer example that I gave earlier, if you are looking to hire more front-end engineers and you know that you're using React as an organization for your JavaScript framework, it would be a great idea to bring a front-end developer with you to do a talk on why you use React. You're providing useful information to the students on what React is and why you think it's a great tool for your organization to use. And you're also going to be able to be like, oh, hey, and our organization's using this, and oh, hey, by the way, we're hiring for it. All really great, useful information for the students, but ultimately, if they don't get hired, it's still going to be great. The other thing that I had just mentioned is bringing backup is super important. I have an amazing team. They do a great job at pitching our positions, but none of them have actually worked in the organization that they're trying to get students to work for. So it is secondhand, and instead bringing people who have firsthand experience is going to be way more useful and beneficial to the students. Now at this point I usually get a lot of questions around what level of seniority you should bring with you. I actually don't really think that matters too much, and I tend to ask the student groups what they would prefer, and it always ends up being a mixed bag of who I end up bringing. We do have a bunch of directors and VPs and even executives here at HubSpot that are willing and eager to come to campus with us, and bringing that wow factor is always really cool. But we also have a bunch of early professionals that come in and they do a great job talking to students too. I think what's actually the most important is bringing people who have the energy. Students get really jazzed when someone is excited to come and talk to them. If you're forcing someone to come, it's probably going to do more harm than good. So it's best to just find those people who are excited and eager to help you and have them join you on campus. So last but not least, you should advertise your own events. As I said before, career services can be super helpful, but also sometimes they're not as helpful. Ultimately, you have to think that you're one of, could be 50 different companies that they're working with at that time. So they're not going to be as dedicated to advertising your events and getting the attendees that you want as you would be. So I do encourage you to promote and advertise your own events. There's a couple different ways that you can do that. We will post ours directly to our student network. We also use Handshake to promote events and to do campaigns through Handshake to make sure that we're directly targeting students that are going to be relevant for the positions that we're hiring for, and finding them and personally inviting them to come to the events. Also sourcing students, whether it be through LinkedIn or any other platform that you use. If you send a direct message being like, hey, so-and-so, I saw your background, it looks perfect for these positions that I'm hiring for, and we're actually coming to talk about the skill set that we're looking for at your campus. Is there any way you're available to attend? students are going to be super excited about that. They're not jaded by outreaches from recruiters yet, so I do think that that's a really great way to get the best talent in. Okay, next, interviewing students. Okay, so as far as I think about it, there's two different ways to think about interviewing. There's just-in-time hiring, and then there's a slate process. I'm going to talk through both of them. I've done both of them. And I'm going to talk about why I prefer one over the other. So just-in-time hiring is what I did when I first started at HubSpot. We had to move as quickly as possible, honestly, so we can get back to the full-time hiring. So what ends up happening when you do just-in-time hiring, it's very much a first-come, first-serve process. You're probably prioritizing the schools that are a little bit more eager to get your positions posted, or students that already know that they need to get their positions early. And you end up finishing hiring very, very quickly. That's not necessarily a bad thing if that's what you need to do, but it also, you probably don't need to, because you're making students sign on probably too early than they're interested in. We found last year that on average it took 30 days for a student to sign and accept an offer, and pressuring them to do it quicker than that can end up increasing your chance for a student to renege on an offer at a later date, which of course we all know is super disruptive to our process, so we don't want that to happen. It also lacks a focus on diversity, in my opinion. If you are just doing just-in-time hiring, you have no idea what the next student's going to bring in, and that's how you can end up with a bunch of students from like one or two schools just because they were the first ones to get through the process. Also, if you have multiple recruiters working on one position, like we do for engineering, you don't really know what one person made an offer to or who they are making an offer to, and then all of a sudden you really lost touch of what your actual cohort that you're bringing in looks like. If you're thinking about engineering, we tend to try to find a cohort that has a good back end and front end split. If we are doing just-in-time hiring, there's really no way to control what that's going to look like, and it ends up not looking like the class that we want it to. So instead, we switched to slate interviewing, I think about 2 years ago now, maybe a little bit more than that. And we've had a lot of luck with it since we switched over. So let me talk through what that looks like. So slate interviewing is finding, you're really able to find all the best candidates because you're taking time to go out, find them, and dedicate to your search. You'll be spending time on campus before making your decisions. So we all know that we only have so much control over when we get to go to campus, right? That's pretty normal that the school dictates when we can actually show up. So you might be opening your positions in like early August, but not be able to go to one of your key target schools until October. If you go to the school and you only have like one position left, but it's a target school and you found 15 students that you're obsessed with and they're a perfect match, that's only giving you a disservice, and it's not really a great look to the students at the school that you claimed was your target school. So make sure you're spending time on campus before making those decisions. The idea around slate is that you're really bringing everyone through the funnel at the same exact time. So you collect all the applications, then you do all the coding assessments, then you do all the phone interviews, and then you decide and bring everyone in for the final round at the same time. I know what you're probably thinking. You're going to have people dropping out left and right because they're getting offers from other places. That may or may not be true, but what we found is as long as we're super, super transparent with the students on our timeline and when they should expect to hear back from us at every stage, they really stay with us and they become even more dedicated to the process. So they're spending more time thinking about their commitment to your company throughout the actual application process and interview process, rather than once they get an offer and we're begging them to sign. By the time they make it through that final round, they know so much about your organization, they know exactly what they're getting into, they've hopefully had a really strong candidate experience with you, and they're going to be ready to sign more quickly than you would if you rushed them through an interview process and quickly gave them an offer. They've only known you for like a week, maybe two. It's not really a great experience for them. Instead, meet them where they're at, give them more time. Students can be very indecisive because this is a huge decision. And I know that we're doing this day in and day out, but we really have to empathize with the students that this is a massive decision. They're probably talking to career service reps, professors, their parents before they want to make a call. So the more that they're familiarizing these people throughout the process with it, the better chance you're going to have at them being super committed and dedicated at the bottom of the funnel. You're also able to prioritize solving for diversity. At every level of the process, you're going to be able to look at your cohort that you have so far, say at assessment, and be like, ooh, I really don't have any from one of the target schools I wanted. I need to do a little bit more there before I move forward in this interview stage. That way you can really focus on every step of the way to to have a cohort that you're proud of, and at the end of the day, you look at it and it's representative of what you were hoping for your next class. Okay, great. Now let's talk a little bit about core attributes. So core attributes is something that HubSpot switched to this past year. It was a major lift, I won't lie, but it was super, super important to making sure that we're assessing people on what they should be assessed for based on what we actually need for the job. So I recommend that you pick 3 max core attributes outside of just technical skills that are really able to focus on potential. So for example, one of my favorite core attributes for our student talent is the coachability attribute. Is this person able to receive feedback and adapt to it and be coached through a difficult problem? If they are, they're going to be an awesome team player. If you have an organization that really is dedicated to a team environment like HubSpot is, this is going to be super critical, especially at the student stage where they don't have a lot of previous experience coming in. So they need to be super down to get coached and to be brought through difficult problems. So we have questions that we ask about past experience where they were coachable, and in our technical portion of it, we coach them through the problem. We do not have a pass-fail process. So I think that's also a super important thing to think about when you're hiring students. Ultimately, a lot of students, they're nervous, they're thinking about the technical problem, they're getting a little too much in their head. If you're just sitting there silently, or if you give them an assessment that they're not able to really work through and think through, then that's going to be an awkward experience for anybody. I know it would be an awkward experience for me. And if you just say like, okay, yep, you failed without working through it with them, you're not going to end up really getting to where you need to go. So if you think about less of a pass-fail process and more of working with the students through it, what you could end up finding is you have a student who might be having a little bit of a difficult time. They're stuck on one portion of a problem. You can be like, hey, have you thought about this at all? And then all of a sudden they're like, oh yeah, of course. Okay, let me do this. I was thinking about this. And they're talking to you and communicating with you through the problem, which is exactly what they would actually do when they work at your organization. So I think it's an important thing to have your interview process to be more representative of what it would be like to actually work on your team. So I know I'm not the first person to tell you this, but it's super important to diversify your panel. I think that every blog that I read, everything that I look at that talks about interviewing at tech companies says that if you haven't diversified your hiring panel yet, you're making a mistake. So I'm going to run through this, but just to tell you how we think about it, but I'm really hoping that this is already something that you're working on. So first things first, don't just use your hiring managers as your interviewers. I think ultimately, for better or worse, hiring managers are super, super focused on just getting a person in the door because they need the help on their team. And that's, not any disservice to them. That's just what they need to focus on. So if you're able to bring more people that might not be on that person's team, but maybe they did a job like that previously, or they just really know who's a great fit at your organization, those types of people are great types of people to bring into the interview process to make sure that they're holding hiring managers accountable to those core attributes and eliminating any bias of just getting this done as fast as possible. So eliminating that bias is really key by bringing in different types of people with different types of perspectives. The other thing that I want to push you on is to really promote inclusivity when it comes to interviewing. So it's students in particular. I mean, honestly, I really don't care if you have 20 years experience or less than 2 months experience. Interviewing is really scary. It's nerve-wracking. You're gonna go into it with your hand shaking and just hoping that someone likes you and hoping somebody asks you the questions that you know how to answer. So anything that you can do to eliminate somebody's nerves in this process, it is our job to do that. So promoting inclusivity is a good way to do that. For example, if I'm a female engineer and I am going to an interview at a tech company that I've been keeping my eye on for a while and I'm super excited, and I go into that interview process and it's a bunch of just white men sitting across from me asking me technical questions, I'm not really going to see myself in that situation. I'm not going to be able to see how I fit there. But if you bring in an interviewer who may be a female engineer who has 3-5 years experience, all of a sudden I'm put a little bit more at ease because I can see myself in her. I'll be able to relate a little bit better. Another great example is if you have alumni from a school that you bring a student in from. There's a bonding point of like, oh great, you're taking such and such a course. I took that. I loved this professor. You should definitely take this next year. It's just a great way to just really alleviate someone's nerves, and all of a sudden they can be themselves, and you're going to get a much better feel on whether or not they're a good fit for your organization. So I'll really push you to think creatively when it comes to diversifying your panel, but don't just get stuck with the same people always interviewing your students. Okay, awesome. Time for retention. This is honestly probably the most important portion of this, because you're spending time investment on campus, and you want to be able to retain these students long term. But I'll also be honest and upfront that this is always going to be a work in progress, especially as you bring in new internship programs into the company. At HubSpot, we have internship programs that have been around for different amounts of years and amounts of time. And our more senior internship programs that have been here for a while have better retention than the newer ones do. And I think that's normal and that's okay. But as long as you're having conversations with your hiring managers, that's what's going to be most important. So let's jump into how we do that. So I think most importantly, to your best ability, don't just hire interns when you don't have a full-time need. I know I've talked to quite a few hiring managers in the past that are like, I'm just swamped right now. I just need help. Just get me somebody that can start next week. Like, no, that's not really how we do it. That's not how our programming is. That's not a good experience for the student. It's not a good experience to bring a student into a stressful environment like that. It doesn't really make sense to hire a student in that situation. And you probably won't have a full-time need for that person if it's just a short-term, one-time thing. That doesn't really make sense. So make sure that when you sit down and you start a new internship program or co-op program, you're pushing that hiring manager to think about that long-term retention plan and have a conversation at that point with their finance team to make sure that it fits into next year's headcount or the year after that, whatever it is. I'm also not sitting here and telling you that you need to retain every student talent that you bring in. Absolutely not. But I would say if you have, an intern class of like 4 or 5, if you can have one position that you're dedicating and holding aside and allowing those students to interview for that full-time role, that's going to just provide a better experience for these students, and it's going to promote your brand on campus better. If you get a brand on campus that is constantly saying like, oh yeah, they hire a bunch of people, but they never retain anybody, that's not actually a good look, and that's not really what students want long term. Going back to my favorite Slate interview process, one thing you can do is prioritize the students that are telling you that they want to retain long term. If you're prioritizing that through the funnel, you're going to be able to, at the bottom of the funnel, be like, okay, great, I have 15 students that I really, really love, and their technical skills are the same, the interview's the same, their backgrounds are the same, I have no idea how to pick, but 3 of them have expressed to you multiple times that like they really want to be at your company long term, and that's why they're trying to get an internship there. That's a great way to eliminate some candidates and prioritize the ones that are super eager about your organization. So let's talk about that and what you can do around constant evaluation. So it really is up to you and up to all of us as recruiters to take this into our own hands to evaluate where students are at. So first at the phone interview stage, so we do it right from the get-go. And one of the questions we'll ask are, what are your plans post-graduation? What are you looking to do? Are you looking to stay in this area? What's going on? What's your mindset at? And we found that a lot of students will be like, oh, I don't know, probably going back home to wherever I'm from. I just want to do like one summer in a new area, but I would never move there. Like, okay, that's fine. And it's okay definitely to have some students like that. But I would think about, as you think about your cohort, making sure that not all of your students aren't interested in converting full-time, and really make sure that you have a good split there. So that's a great question to just gather that information. Then during the face-to-face, so their final round interview stage, you can ask again, so why HubSpot long-term? So I use HubSpot, but insert your company there. So why are you looking at our company for long-term placement? How does this really fit into what you're thinking? And then at the offer stage, they now know everything about the organization. They know everything about what you're offering to them. So you can say, what does this position, or how does this position fit with your long-term career goals? I think that's super important to make sure that they are coming in, they're taking a role that fits into what they're looking to do long-term. So that way it's really a best fit for everybody. And then after they start again. So I still have the recruiter sit down right when they start and they're getting a little bit of a better feel for the organization, and say point blank, if offered, what would it take for you to say yes to a full-time offer here? So that right there, you're going to be able to get a good grasp on like, okay, well, I want to make sure that I see a lot of mentorship while I'm here. I want to get a good salary. You'll figure out all the information that they're really looking for to make sure that you're prioritizing that as you bring them through their internship. I didn't really get into this, but the other thing that I would just have a little caveat for now is you should also sit down with whoever the student manager is and teach them how to talk to their students about this too. So my typical recommendation, and everyone does it a little bit different, but we have our tech leads for engineering. They will plan on having a one-on-one conversation at least once a month about how the students kind of tracking towards a full-time offer, and then definitely at the halfway point being a little bit more definitive, like, hey, this is the feedback I've given you, this is how you've taken it. It's not going as well as I would like right now. Let's do a little bit more to see if we can get you to that full-time offer stage, or be like, hey, it's great. We're really excited about you, and have another conversation about what it would take to accept them a full-time offer. Really lean on your managers to help you with this conversation as you work with the students through their position. But I would also be super transparent and upfront with the students about the timelines and how they're being evaluated, and honestly make it clear to them that an internship is basically a long interview process, and make sure that they know that we are looking for their growth, we're looking for their coachability, we're looking for them to participate, be excited, learn, and adapt to feedback, and all of those are super important things to really nailing that full-time position at the end of it. But most importantly, work with your hiring managers, make sure that this is a priority for them so that you're not doing a ton of work and then at the end of the day, they don't even want it. Awesome. So that is all I have for you. I have all the faith that you're going to crush this process. If it's your first time starting an internship program, you kind of have all the good fundamentals now to get yourself started, but ultimately you have what it takes to go, so good luck.
So that brings us to Colleen's presentation end. I have a small presentation for all. It's about what Hackerearth does. And as Colleen very rightly pointed out, that having the right talent is very important for any organization across the globe. So, and when it comes to hiring from campuses, it's very important that you get early talent and the best talent. So this is a very common statement these days that tech skills is one of the most valued global currency, and organizations across the globe are actually betting on the tech skills to drive innovation as well as growth in their organizations. And be it any company, be it a big size company such as HubSpot, Netflix, a Facebook, a Google, Amazon, or an Apple, to a startup that has made big names such as an Airbnb or Oculus, to certain non-traditional computer software companies like Walmart Labs and FedEx. And to be honest, everyone is requiring software engineers at the end of the day, because the world is moving towards automation, and for automation you require engineers. Here is the big problem. Hiring developers is really hard. It's actually pretty hard. And these are some stats around technical recruiting. It takes around 50 to 60 days to close a position, 10,000 plus hours spent in screening, 6 plus rounds of assessments, and the last point, $30,000 is the average cost of hire. Now that's something huge. These are the certain challenges that recruiters across the globe are facing, and it is assessing the right candidates, getting the right talent, and getting the best, getting the cream out of the young talent that is out there, and identifying them accurately. The third point, understanding the expectation of the candidate. I mean, Colleen has very well stated throughout this presentation that it's very important to understand the candidate, to have a conversation with them, to let them know what lies in your organization for them. And the last one, battling with remote hiring. This is where we come for you. This is where we help you. So Hackerearth provides you with two solutions, one of them being a developer assessment software, and the second one being a hackathon software. So hackathons is another means of finding out the top cream, the top talent, in which you can give a problem statement to, let's say, universities in your region, in your target schools, and the participants can participate, try to solve that particular problem statement, and then you can get to a consensus that these are the best candidates. While on the other hand, the developer assessment software is again very useful when it comes to campus hiring, because you need to assess your candidates, you need to have the best. The assessment software helps you in reducing the time to hire, developing a candidate experience. A good candidate experience is very important so that the candidate feels one with the platform and improve the quality of hires as well as scaling across roles. This is the Hackerearth difference. The reduction in time to hire is significant by almost 50%, and the quality of hire is also improved by 60% across organizations for different industries. It's not just computer software industry or the IT industry. These are some customers that we have across the globe, a few big names there, and to be honest, Amazon uses Hackerearth for their campus recruiting. So that is something that has been there for a long time now. And this is the platform at a glance. You can build your test using your custom questions or use a library of 15,000 plus questions that we already have. And we cover skills around 75 plus skills with 35 plus programming languages. The proctoring settings are really robust. You have to make sure that the candidate is actually having the skills that they mentioned, and then not just throwing away certain skills on their resume. So it's very important to test them on their skills and make sure that it is the right person who's giving the test and they do not have any support from their friends. Conducting remote interviews, one more important thing, the candidate might not be in your region, he might be sitting somewhere else, and you want to interview them. This is something that we offer you. We offer you with a platform through which you can remotely interview them. And the last point, very important for hiring managers, an in-depth analysis of the candidate performance. You need to know how the candidate performed, what are his plus points, what does he lack in, so that you can train him accordingly, and you have the best talent there. So if you're looking to hire from campuses, from lateral hirings, or anywhere else, Hackerearth is a solution out there. You can use this for our developer assessment platform, or maybe for conducting hackathons. That is another good venture. So that brings me to the end of my presentation, and we are open to questions now. And so, Colleen, we have lots of questions. I'll have tried to collate them together. So one of the questions that has been asked a lot of times is how many campus hirings does HubSpot do around the year? So I guess it is more of a kind of a question in which people want to understand as to a large company like HubSpot, how many hires do you actually have in mind when you start a particular year?
Yeah, absolutely. So in total from all of our campus hiring, we're looking at for 2020, it's looking like we're going to be pushing around 200 hires.
Perfect. So in the meantime, we have a poll about the feedback around this session, and we'll be taking the questions parallelly. So I'll run the poll, and I would request each one of you to actually rate this session and help us improve. So, okay, moving on to the questions. Colleen, so Jamie is asking us, he finds that sometimes student groups require payments to interact with them. Example, NSB at VA Tech has like a 1.K engagement cost. So what are your thoughts about the same?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have, well, I'll start when I got started with campus. We didn't have any budget. I did not pay to go to campus at all. I think at most I had to pay, obviously, to travel some places, but that is about as much as my organization was able to put into this. Since then, we do have a little bit more of a sponsor budget that we put into certain organizations, but again, we're super, super strategic about which ones we'll do. So as I think about paying for them, I would encourage you to heavily negotiate with student groups on what that looks like and if they have any flexibility there. I think if you're super upfront with them and just be like, hey, you know, I really want to hire your students. This is what I can provide you, but ultimately we don't have sponsorship funds. We have found that students can be super willing and able to be adaptable there because they do ultimately want you to come, right? They want you to they want you to come and hire their students. They want you to come and talk to them. They want to have interesting speakers. So a lot of the time we don't find that it's too big of a hassle to push through it. I don't get away with that anymore, but if you're more in like the startup entering scale up stage as an organization, you can usually push them to do that instead. The other thing I would say is if you're thinking about doing your first round of making investment into a campus recruiting program, putting your investment towards something like Handshake is a better use of your money, where you are able to access those student groups, but also access people at all different organizations, so you don't have to be quite as choosy when it comes to like giving, a couple thousand here, a couple thousand there to actual school investment. So that's how we think about it. I would say that, you just think about what makes sense for you and be transparent with the students.
Perfect. I guess that answers that question. Jamie has one more question. So he says that he's a one-person team in hiring at his organization, and he has a hiring class of 35 interns and 30 new graduates. And this is something that he pitched to his CTO last year, and he couldn't actually pull it off. But it's a major goal for him in 2020. So what he's asking is, can you outline timeline for the slate process that you mentioned in the slide?
Absolutely. So it's a little bit different for every area that we hire for. But typically the way we think about it is in the fall is when we'll do the majority of our slate hiring, and we do actually all of our technical hiring for the most part in the fall. So what we'll do is we open our positions in August, get them all pushed out to our schools so that right when students start, they're hit with our roles right away, get all the applications in, and we'll start doing phone interviews. Usually by like mid-September, we'll work through our phone interviews. That is by far the longest stage of our process, just because you want to talk to kind of as many people as possible. If you're a technical position, you'll want them also to pass an assessment. We do those kind of at the same time. If it's not a technical position that we're talking about, we still have some other stage in there, whether it's like a writing sample for marketing. Sometimes we do one-sided video interviews, make them answer a few questions to get help us narrow down the talent a little bit. So that'll start happening end of September, early October. And then what we'll do is our what we call like a block interview day, or a couple days, are usually at the end of October or the beginning of November, depending on timelines. We do work directly with our target schools to pick all of these dates though, because we want to make sure that we're prioritizing our target schools in our funnel. So I'll reach right out to whoever I'm working with at a target school and be like, hey, we're thinking about doing final rounds on this day. How does that work with your midterm schedule? Or how does that work with events that you're having going on campus, or whatever it is? So that way we can make sure that we are still prioritizing the students that we want. And then for non-technical positions, like our marketing internships, which is another huge program that we have here, what gets a lot of interest, we'll post those positions right now. Actually, we're posting them this week. So what's a really great thing to think about when it comes to attracting students is get them while they're home not doing anything. So what we usually find is over the holiday break, especially in the US, they have so much time off. A lot of the times they're sitting at home. A lot of the times their students, or their parents, I should say, are pushing them to like, hey, you need to get a job, you got to go apply, get your application out everywhere. So we get a ton of applications over the holidays. So then right at the turn of the year when we come back, that's when we'll start the reviewing process. And again, it's about a 2-month process. So on average, if you're applying to a student position at HubSpot, you're in it for 2 months before the face-to-face stage. That's typically what we say.
Okay, perfect. That's really insightful. And moving on to the next question. So do you prefer offering internships to campus hirings, or do you think that it's better to offer them with a full-time position at the first itself?
So I hate to do this, but I'm going to give you a big it depends. I personally think that I prefer internship for a few reasons, and I'll lay that out. If your company has the budget to do interns, then absolutely you should do it. If you don't, then okay, you can start thinking about straight full-time hiring. But what we found, especially if you're a global program, but even if you're just the US, a lot of schools prefer companies that are coming in to talk to their students about intern talent as well as full-time talent. So if you can go in and say like, hey, I have all these internship or all these co-op opportunities that I'm looking to push to your students, and then I'm running a conversion rate of 60% from that hire, that's going to be really attractive to a school, because it's almost like they're getting a double placement with one company. So it's less work on their end, because they do obviously want their students to get jobs, right? So if you get them in, if they get them in as an internship where it's a little bit easier to convince a company to hire somebody, and then you convert them full time, it looks good for the company, or it looks good for the school because their offer rates are huge and their students graduating with a job goes up, so that's great. And then it's great for your organization because you can really test out that talent before you hire it full time. So I would encourage you to do that. The tricky part of that, though, is you need to have a champion on the business side to help you with that. So as a campus team, we don't really put together too much of what the student's going to do when they get here. And I know, as you probably noticed, that's something that I didn't talk about in the webinar, because we do have individual people within the organization that helps put together the content and the things that the students are actually working on when they get to HubSpot. So you need to have those people, those partners in the organization. They're going to come up with what the students need to do when they get here if they're just going to be an intern, because it's obviously going to be different than a full-time hire. So I'd say that's how you have to think about it. So if you're going to your CTO and talking to them about it, is there someone on the team, an engineer on the team that has been, fighting for more diversity at your organization, or someone who's been fighting for you to go to their alma mater? Those are your champions. Those are the people that are coming up that are really going to help you. Grab that person and be like, hey, I want to do this. I want to have an internship program. I want to retain more talent, but I need your help to prove that this is worth it and to really figure out what they're going to do when they get here. I'm not an engineer. I can't tell you exactly what a student should work on once they actually work at HubSpot, but I do have really amazing champions, an entire team here that's dedicated to figuring that out. So that's a super important thing to kind of break down. So I hope that answers your question on how we think about it.
Perfect. So I've combined the next question. So the next question is by Alexa, Destiny, and Charlene. So it's a little similar for the three of them. So the question here is, can you talk about how you have previously gone about reaching out to student groups and professors on campus and building the brand around HubSpot on campus?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot that goes into that. And it's a little bit different by department, but for student groups in particular, a lot of schools will have their student groups listed on their school website. It won't always have the actual person that's the president, but it usually has some sort of contact information there. So that's a great place to start. And the other thing when it comes to reaching out to student groups, think about reaching out as early as possible. So for example, we'll reach out to student groups in March, April, if we already know that we want to talk to them for the fall. The sooner that you can talk to them and get your company scheduled for a meeting with them to do a tech talk or what have you, the better chance you're actually going to get in there. If you wait too long, a lot of the times all the spots are taken up because most student groups meet once a week, maybe sometimes every other week even. Sometimes it's only once a month. So there's only so many opportunities for you to come in and get to one of those awesome meetup sessions that they have and talk to them there, which I think are the best way to break in. So for example, if they're only doing like Thursday afternoons, there's only so many of those in the fall that you're actually going to be able to go to. So making sure that you get that in sooner is better. Once you start going to student groups though, you're going to be able every time a semester ends, be like, okay, hey, great, who's your next president for next semester? And then that way you already have the contact information and you keep that going and you keep that relationship going. That way you're not always reinventing the wheel. Also, I know I keep on pushing Handshake. It is a huge thing that we use. It's a massive part of our process. You can find those who are involved with student groups through Handshake. A lot of students will register if they're part of like a women in business group or a software engineer society right on Handshake. So you can go out and be like, okay, great, I'm going to email these 10 people that I know are part of this student group so that I can get them talking to me and interested in working with us. So that's an easy way to like reach directly out to the students that are involved. As far as building your brand on campus, there's a couple different ways to do it. I'll be honest, it's not always the easiest thing to do. And that's why a lot of people end up doing career fairs. If you have absolutely no brand, that can sometimes be a go-to approach for people to just get their name out there. But I guarantee you that it actually won't work that well, because if you're going to a career fair, Google, Facebook, Amazon, they all still go to career fairs. They always have a team that's dedicated to it, and they're just going to have a line of 80 students in front of them and no one going in front of you. So it doesn't really make sense. Instead, I would think of more of a virtual approach. So again, if you're reaching out to a student group or if you're reaching out to if you're working with a career service department or you're reaching out to a professor, if you say like, hey, I want to join in for a webinar where I'm going to discuss the latest in mobile development and how we were able to bring a web application to a mobile application to your students. That's something that students want to learn about. I think one thing that I've really learned with the next generation is they don't just want to be spammed with opportunities. They want to know what they're going to learn when they get there. They want to make sure that you're dedicating to their continued education. So the more that you're able to promote that you can do that, they're going to be like, okay, well, I haven't really heard about this company before, but they have a pretty good product and they want to come and talk to us about this really awesome latest technology. Okay, great, let's do it. Let's just bring them in. Let's hear what they have to say. That's going to promote your brand as somebody who's really dedicated to giving back to a student and continued education rather than just being like, hey, we're hiring, please, please, please come work here. Like, no, they have so many offers and so many companies reaching out to them. You got to give them something to get something from them, because students these days really, they're not blinded as much by, they're not even really blinded as much by brand names, but definitely not money. They want to make sure, what are they going to do when they get there? What are they going to learn? And how are you going to help them? So the more that you can promote that, the better. This is the first year that we've done a full webinar series. We did it for sales this round, but we're looking to expand it to other areas that we hire for. That's also really becoming helpful. I love students, work with students every day, but students are inherently pretty lazy. So the less that they have to do, if they can just click in, join a webinar, listen to you talk, and then they get like a CTA at the end. It's like, hey, oh, by the way, here are our position, click here to apply. Great, awesome. They're just going to jump in and do that. It's so easy for them. So remove any of the friction in the process so that students can really meet you where you're at. So those are some areas that we do. Again, with events, using Handshake is going to be really helpful to promote your events on campus, but also using LinkedIn and Eventbrite to promote events that way too. So making sure that you control that messaging and get it out to as many people as possible that are going to be relevant is going to be super helpful.
Great. So I guess that answers all the three questions that we had. And now we have a lot of questions about HubSpot. So
Great.
I'll try to keep them as short as possible. So does HubSpot host on-campus interviews?
We do. So we host on-campus interviews for certain positions. We're very, 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 very picky about it because one thing that you want to avoid is interviewer fatigue. If you only have so many interviewers and you're trying to diversify your panel, and you're not that big of an organization, there's only so many people that you can bring. So we try to be really restrictive about it. One area that we can't avoid, and it's super important to our process, is our MBA internship program. They require a first round on campus. Okay, great. So that we can do that. That's not a problem. But on engineering, we'll only interview on campus for our target schools, and that's it. So it's usually like 3 schools or so. And the only reason that we're doing that is they're probably not local, first of all. So we'll fly to them to make sure that they actually get an interview because we're trying to prioritize those people in our funnel. And then they'll get priority placement. So they'll, if you're a target school student, you get to accept your offer sooner. But the downside of that though is they'll get an offer sooner, but they have to accept it before our block slate, so that we are still following the same slate process that gives us like a good eye for what we're looking for. The other thing when it comes to on-campus interviewing is we'll tell all students that they shouldn't expect to hear back from us on their interview until after the block interviewing. So we're kind of like, okay, great, you got to interview earlier, so that's like your benefit. They need to really absolutely kind of crush their interview to actually get an offer earlier. We do still typically make them wait until we've interviewed all people to give them an offer. So there's 2 kind of avenues that we go down when it comes to on-campus interviewing. One avenue is they're absolute rock stars and we make them an offer right there, and they'll have until the start of the block interviewing to accept. Or they are good and they're, we're interested in them and they did well in the interview, but we don't want to give them an early offer, so we make them wait until after the block interview. And in order to save our candidate experience, we tell all students that are interviewing that they're going to have to wait until after the block interview. So if they get an offer earlier, great, it's a surprise, and it's actually only usually a few students that we give offers to earlier. Everybody else typically waits till the end. So it relieves the pressure that they don't have to interview anymore, they don't have to kind of wait for that, but they're still staying in the process longer, they're still getting to know us better, And we do a really great job at like following up with them, making sure we're building the rapport, inviting them to other events, doing whatever we can to keep them engaged, so that they're still interested when it comes time to actually give the offers.
That's really interesting to know. I mean, a lot of people might have gained a lot of things from today's session. And moving on, what is your ratio when it comes to going to a campus and hiring interns versus hiring full-time employees?
Yep. So my actual team, so the people that you saw at the beginning, we specialize in intern and co-op hiring. We do hire some direct full-time from campus within our team. So we do our leadership rotational program and our accelerated leadership MBA program, and we do some sales full-time hiring. But outside of that, the majority of what we're hiring for are co-op intern and MBA intern. So when you think about kind of what the flip side of that is, because we still do have a bunch of people interested in support and sales positions and full-time engineering positions, but we don't typically interview on campus with those roles. They usually will promote those opportunities and have them come in through the funnel. And our entire organization is dedicated to Slate interview processes. So they still go into a similar process, but they're actually handed off to another team that does more full-time hiring, just because the volume's so huge. At this time, the campus team isn't in charge of all of the support hiring or all of the sales hiring, because they really are huge programs.
Perfect. So next question by Sarah, and she's asking, do you help interns with housing, transportation? And what are the reasons behind providing or not providing such perks?
Yeah, that is a great question. It's tough. So right now, we don't offer everybody relocation benefits. I'm going to give you another, it depends. It's a case-by-case basis. One thing that we can say is any student from our target school will pay relocation for that, because it's typically we're reaching out, we're engaging with them, and they are kind of getting into our interview process because we directly reached out to them, as opposed to somebody who just applied directly and then asked for relocation benefits. But again, it's something, if that's a work in progress, we're figuring that out long term of kind of what we want to do and how we want to scale. I have a feeling that you're asking this question because it's really expensive, and it can all of a sudden double your budget for what you're looking to invest into campus. So it's a really difficult thing to do, and HubSpot's just starting to figure it out. But I absolutely know and can empathize with you, and I say that a lot of the San Francisco companies, a lot of the major tech organizations are paying relocation, and they're paying for housing for students. So it's a lot, and we are not at the point where we can do that. But one thing that I'll give everybody that we'll tend to say to students, and I wholeheartedly mean it, when I start talking to a student at the kind of beginning of the process in a phone interview, I'll ask them why they wouldn't accept an offer if they got it at the end. So we really put the pressure on the students a little early to think strategically about their deciding factors. And a lot of them, they'll be like, I want to learn, I want to be dedicated, I want to be really excited to come into work every day, I want to have mentorship and all of that. So I make sure to promote and kind of put back on them what they told me was most important to them. So if they don't mention relocation, or they don't mention salary, or they don't mention any of those things, like, okay, well, originally you said that wasn't really as important. Has that changed? Why has it changed? Are you still interested in going to a program where you're going to have a lot of autonomy and be super excited to come into work every day? Have we proven that this is a great place for you based on that? And a lot of times we can get them to kind of circle back to their core requirements. The other thing I would say is make sure, to the best of your ability, you're paying students at a marketable rate. So we have an amazing team here that evaluates salaries for students, or evaluates salaries for the entire company, but they do intern, co-op, and entry level as well. So they'll give us updates on what they think is a fair rate to pay students. So ultimately, when they get here, we know that they're being paid competitively, which is really nice. So they kind of have that under their belt too. So those are some of the ways that we think about it. And one other thing that I'll just add on to that, if you are still doing this, we do, just so you know, we don't do credits for our internships. All of our internships and co-ops are paid. So and if a student gets credit in addition behind the scenes there, I don't really know how that works, but as far as we're concerned, we do pay for all student talent.
Great. So moving on, we way past our time, but we'll take up the questions since we love to take questions, I guess.
Yeah.
So this question is by Lauren, and she's asking, the 30-day offer accept period is pretty long. Do you have a backup list of students if your number one candidate does not accept?
So very important thing to go back to that slide and to go in on here. It's a 30-day acceptance process if you're doing the just-in-time hiring. That's why we switched. So if you continue to do 30 days, or if you continue to do just in time, what you're going to end up seeing is that a lot of students push back and push back and push back. I'm like, hey, can I have an extension? Can I have an extension? Can I have an extension? And on average, what you'll end up seeing is 30 days. We don't typically just go and offer students 30 days to accept. That's not what we're doing. But if you do just in time, you're going to end up, and you don't want to lose the talent, you're going to end up being like, okay, you can have another week. Okay, you can have another week. And yes, we will have backup candidates. And if that's the situation that we're in and we have backup candidates that are waiting for someone to accept, we're providing a horrible candidate experience to those backup candidates. So that's another reason why we switched to Slate. Now that we've switched to Slate, we do not see students taking 30 days. They are much more dedicated to the process. They've been in communication with us. They've been talking to a recruiter, at least via email once a week since they started. So it's usually about 2 months of a full Slate process. But at the end of the day, once they're getting an offer, we give a week for them to decide. And we're usually able to get students to commit within that week because they already know all about us. They've been in this process for so long. They've been waiting. So they're much more dedicated.
Cool. Moving on, this question is by Katie, and she's starting off with a campus program for her organization, which did not exist. And they recently hired a campus program manager, and he or she will start off with centralizing the process. So, what are the top recommendations from your side when trying to change the mindset with recruiters, hiring managers, and business units?
Yeah, so when you're trying to just get started and you're trying to start like a brand new process into your organization, I think it's really important to start at the top. The reason that I was able to get as much buy-in as I did, it wasn't an easy thing. It started by going to like our VP level and showing them the type of things that students can provide. The other thing is you really need to look in and kind of put back on your stakeholders what they're saying their company mission is. One thing that I'm going to speak a slightly out of turn because I don't have total like metrics to back this up right now, but I think it's pretty safe to say that if your company is dedicated to improving the diversity within the tech organization and to make your organization a more diverse place, starting at the student level is a better place to start. It can be more tailored. There's more junior talent that's more diverse. Trying to solve that at the like 5-year experience level is just that much more difficult. So taking a step back, focusing on students and retaining is going to help them solve that problem long term. So that's a really good way to show like, hey, you need to invest in this. This is really important. You said it's important. So it's kind of like, okay, now you have to put your money where your mouth is almost and figure out how to work with me to make this happen. When it comes to changing recruiter processes, if you have if you have like a director of recruiting, a VP of recruiting, whoever's in charge of recruiting over there, I would say go directly to them and be like, hey, this is how I've seen other companies do it. So that's huge. You might not want to go to all of the business units with that information. I think I've found that I have certain business units that really care a lot about how other companies do it, and I'm constantly doing research to figure that out. And some business units that are like, I don't want to be like other companies. Let's make our own way. So that's all fine and well. But when you go to your head of recruiting and say to them, this is what I've learned and this is how this has happened, and look at how much this program's grown at this company, or look at how their diversity's changed at this company, you're able to get them dedicated to changing the process a little bit to match it. So when we switched all of recruiting over to a Slate interview process, there was a lot of growing pains there. We really had to figure out how to make this work for us. And it was hard. It was tough. There was a lot of bumps. But ultimately, once we got everybody in the mindset of forward hiring and figuring out like, okay, I need to figure out in Q1 a slate process to do for people to start in Q3 or whatever it is. It's giving your team a lot more time and leeway. And I actually think it takes a lot of pressure off recruiters. So I think if there's anybody who you're not going to have as hard of a time convincing that this is a better process, it's recruiters, because they're not running around like a chicken with their head cut off anymore. So one thing that you can think about is it's never a good process, and you can say this to your director of recruiting, it's never a good process when you have a recruiter dedicated kind of to every stage of the interview process, especially for students. So if you're working with a massive volume and you have recruiters jumping in to do phone interviews, but then they're also trying to close candidates, but they're also scheduling face-to-face interviews, their mind is in so many different areas, and they're actually providing probably a pretty poor candidate experience across the board. Instead, if you dedicate to each area individually, they're super focused and in the mindset of like, okay, I just got to crush these phone interviews, got to find the best people out of these phone interviews and bring them all forward and be like, okay, great. Now I'm going to work with all of these through the assessment, figure out who's the best technical talent, and then face-to-face and then offer. When they're more dedicated, you're going to get a better outcome. So being able to talk to that and talk confidently to that is super important. Also, as you're starting a campus program, think as best as you can to make it scrappy. Don't spend a ton of money right away. Going in and just asking for a ton of investment right off the bat isn't going to work. It's a huge bet. You're not going to have any metrics to back you up on the success of how it's going to work within your organization. You can show other companies, but you can't show your own, which isn't great. So really just go in to be like, let's control what we can. Let's change our process to match student timelines better, but let's not go in and do a $20,000 investment to some tech school. Let's not do that. Instead, let's focus on what we can control. So that was a very long-winded answer, but I hope that helps with just kind of thinking about how to get started.
Yes, I guess that helps anyone build their campus recruiting strategy. Moving on, the last few questions, I guess. This question is by Ashley. And the question is, on campus interviewing, do you use the same interviewers across all schools, or do the recruiters make the decision based on calibration notes and compare the candidates apples to apples?
Good question. So when we go to campus, we have different people traveling with us for each campus. Reason being is because, again, we want to avoid interviewer fatigue. We also never want to take engineers or any business professionals away from their core job for too long. If someone stops not performing on their day job to help out campus recruiting, that's a horrible look for campus recruiting. So make sure that doesn't happen. So when it comes to traveling, we use different people, and we'll calibrate each on-campus interview as recruiters. So one of my recruiters will go out, they'll bring back the people, I'll look through it with them and determine who we want to hire from there. We do also we have a lot of autonomy, which is amazing, but we have a backup plan we have our VPs of engineering that work with us closely on that side to, if I'm like, I'm tossed, I don't know if I should do this or not, if it's like a total toss up, I'll send it over to them to make the final call when it's needed. But again, we've seen so many students come through that your recruiters should be able to calibrate who's best for your organization. And if they can't, I would push your hiring managers to be a little bit more trusting. And if they're not more trusting, then they probably have something wrong with the recruiting team, and if there's a lack of trust there. So that's kind of how we think about that. Then when it comes to the block interviews, the real big interviews, just to put into volume perspective for you, for our co-op round for engineering, we brought in 76 candidates in a week to do final round interviews at HubSpot, which was a lot for our engineers. But we had a specific team of engineers that were dedicated to interviewing these students. So it's a ton for them. It's a crazy week. It's a lot of talking to people. It's a lot of similar profiles. But they are people that, like I said, find your champions that are dedicated to making this process better, dedicated to hiring the best people onto their teams. They know it's important. And so for that process, we have a dedicated team that's calibrating with us and eliminating as we go and flagging the real stars. So we worked really closely with them for that. But the other thing I would say, going back to the core attributes, those core attributes are assigned to individual interviewers to focus on. Make sure that everybody kind of stays in their lane with what they're supposed to be calibrating for, so that you don't go into a situation where you have a bunch of people being like, I don't know, I just didn't get a good vibe from them. Like that's not what I don't care. That's not good. That's not something, that's not an attribute. I can't give someone that feedback that you didn't vibe with them. That's not right. So make sure that you're really pushing them to stay to those core attributes. And it's up again, up to you and up to the recruiters to be like, okay, let's look at all of these core attributes. This person had all of them. This person had 2 of them. What's the best match here? So really it is up to recruiting to make those final decisions, but you can put together a team that you feel is going to give you that energy and support to make the best call.
Perfect. So we'll take the last 2 questions now, because we're already up time by almost half an hour now, and I can see you sipping some water as well. I guess you are pretty tired of speaking for the last almost an hour and 15 minutes, so we'll keep this short. So 2 questions. How does the slate process work when you are hiring for different disciplines in different divisions?
Yep. So I mean, it's different openings. So we will have different slate processes running for different divisions. There is typically a lot of overlap. So we have a lot of students coming in at once, but if you go back to kind of my team outline slide, if we have, say, a sales block interview, a marketing block interview, and an engineering block interview going on, the recruiters that are in charge of promoting those roles will run those block interview processes. If you are the only recruiter doing it, I've done that before too. That just means that you have to not have them all overlap and hopefully space them out like week after week, preferably if you can. That's typically how I do it, and I wouldn't use the same interviewers, of course. You should be using interviewers from the departments that you're hiring for. So it should never really be the same interviewers. It might be the same recruiter, but not the same interviewers. And I know that sounds like a lot for a recruiter to do, especially if you have one recruiter working for a couple different departments. But the way I think about that, and if anyone from my team is listening to this call, they're going to probably roll their eyes at me a little bit, but ultimately, when we're in season, things are crazy, they're busy, we got to do what it takes to get the job done. And then campus recruiting is really lucky, where I'm sure everyone has experienced, you're slower when you're not in season. So enjoy that downtime, definitely. But then when you're on, you're on. So it can get busy, it can get crazy. And when you're hiring recruiters that are going to be dedicated to campus recruiting, hire people that are dedicated to that process and get energized by the crazy rather than super jaded by the crazy. So I'd say those are some ways to think about it. It is a lot. I'm not going to sit here and say like, oh, it's a walk in the park. It's not. It's going to be difficult. Things are going to go wrong. But just make sure that you have the right people hired for it. And if you don't, then I would really reevaluate who you're working with on figuring out that process rather than just say that it doesn't work for you.
Awesome. So the last question, and this last question will be from me and not anyone else, because I would love to know something about campus recruiting as well. So when it comes to campus recruiting, what would be your, let's say, 3 pointers that someone as a campus recruiter must always keep in their mind when it comes to recruiting?
3 pointers. So
Yes.
I would say hire for potential is the number 1. A student has a lot to learn. Stop treating them like they should come in with everything already in their back pocket. They shouldn't. So make sure you're hiring for potential and focusing on that. Make sure that you have programs that you're promoting that support the growth of a student. So number 2 thing is don't let someone just hire somebody because they have like a hard problem to solve on their team or something. If it's not going to lead to a full-time, long-term growth, don't hire for it. And 3rd, keep an open mind. Students can come from all different areas, all different types of schools. Do not just get stuck in the schools that you always go to. Push yourself to diversify your school set, and you're going to be really surprised with how great your cohorts can be. So I'd say those are the big 3 things as you're promoting campus recruiting to really keep in mind.
Perfect. So that answers my question as well. And I guess we covered all the questions almost. Awesome. And once again, letting all the attendees know that this session was recorded, and we'll be sending across the recording to you pretty soon. With this, we come to the end of today's session. And I mean, I fall short of words when I have to thank Colleen for this session. It was a highly informative session for someone like me who's not into recruiting. And I hope all the recruiters across the globe, be it a campus recruiter or a general recruiter, might have learned a lot of new things from this session. So big thanks to Colleen for taking time out of her busy schedule and being a part of today's session. And for being kind and really supportive of the fact that we stretched our time beyond the session that we had planned by
No.
almost half an hour. And really, really thank you for that. Really appreciate your time.
Great. Thank you for having me. This has been great.
Yeah. And last but not the least, thank you to all our attendees for attending our sessions. We would love to have some feedback from you, and you can either tag Hackerearth or maybe tag Colleen as well on LinkedIn and Twitter with your feedback. And we'll look forward to having you at more sessions coming forward. And closing off, a very happy festive season to everyone across the globe. Thanksgiving is just around the corner, and we have Christmas coming up. So Merry Christmas already to everyone, and as well as Happy Thanksgiving. So thank you so much, everyone, and hope to see you. And bye-bye. And thank you so much, Colleen, once again.
Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.